opening of multiple diamonds mines led to an increased need for labor. So many people coming from overseas were wealthy and unwilling to work on the mines themselves. So laws meant that black people could not own mines. So black people weren't allowed to own mines. Out of a need for money, black workers, including migrant workers from other parts of Africa, took jobs on mines and were exploited by the mine workers since they didn't have money. They were paid very little money as compared to the wealth they generated for the mine owners. The working and living conditions were very dangerous and unpleasant. Compounds. So, because black people, mine workers often traveled from their homes to diamond fields from work, they had no place to live. So, owners had accommodation for the black owners called compounds. They were buildings that were kept separate from the accommodation for white people. Men were free to come and go on the compounds. When leaving the mines for the day, they were strip searched for diamonds during their free time. Men engaged in various activities such as dancing, singing, and eating. Food was provided, but there was little, that was very little, so they often had to buy more using their wages. The compounds were uncomfortable, unhygienic, and the men had to sleep in the same room, on the floor, or in uncomfortable bunks. The floor was often just dirty, dirt that had turned to mud when it rained. There were many deaths due to pneumonia because the rooms were not kept warm, and the workers were not given enough food or medical treatment. Diseases such as tuberculosis spread quickly because of the close living quarters. Alright, because I mean, they were living very close to each other. If somebody had tuberculosis, then the other person could have it. Closed compounds. In 1885, large mining companies decided to implement a closed compound system. This meant that workers were not allowed to leave the compound except for work for the duration of their contract. They were kept behind walls topped with barbed wire, separated from their families. This was trying to prevent theft and to prevent workers from leaving before their contract had expired. So basically, what their living conditions were like, people living in a jail. Men were divided into buildings based on tribe. So this created division between the men, sometimes led to tension. The lifestyle differed from the traditional village lifestyles, and this was emotionally straining on the men. At the end of workers' contracts, they were stripped search for diamonds. Sometimes workers would swallow small diamonds to smuggle them off the compound. So to stop this from happening, they were expected to remain on the compound for 8 days after their contract had ended, during which time they were given laxatives and made to wear thick gloves. These gloves were to prevent them from being able to pick up and swallow diamonds after the first search. Okay, so what does let's do this activity. Describe what the living conditions were like in the compound based on the images. So based on the images, the people were living very terribly. They were living very close to each other. Um, uh, they were living, many of them, in one room, right? So what does the compound look like? It looks like a jail. And how do you think this would make the workers feel? So they would feel disinterested since they were being treated um, as people who've committed a crime. Okay, let's look at further land disposition and defeat of African kingdoms. So after the discovery of diamonds, the British sought to take further control of land in southern Africa in order to attract investors. So it was deemed necessary to secure the land surrounding the mines for safety and control. So the indigenous people, who are the original owners of the land, were forced off their land, and the British strengthened their hold. By the late 870s, most smaller tribes had been dispossessed or moved away from their original land. The Xhosas, Pedis, and Zulus still had control of their lands. The Boers did not have the strength to fight these tribes and therefore encouraged the British to do so. So, despite resisting and going to war, the British eventually defeated these kingdoms. Xhosa lost their land in 1878, the Zulus and Pedis in 1879. These people had to move far away or end up in as laborers. Okay, so give a definition for the term land disposition. So, it's being moved away from your original land. Explain why the British felt that they need to secure the lands around the mines for the investors. So they need to make sure that whoever was going to come and invest in the mines was going to be safe. Okay. So suggest a reason why the Boers wanted the British to take control of the indigenous people's land, despite being at odds with the British themselves. They knew that their army was not strong enough to overpower the indigenous people, so they decided to use the British, which had an army that was strong. So, using the evidence from the image, explain why the British were able to eventually defeat the Zulus in battle and take possession of the land. They were able to defeat them because they were using guns. So, what happened to many of the indigenous people after the land was taken? They fled the areas, and we have come to the end of this lesson.